I am wearing a ton of hats. I'm representing the Stripe Climate Fellows program and the RMI program here on a talk today, where what I'm going to share with you usually comes across as a big idea. Antonius and Diane said, we really want big ideas. They did not warn me that Stan was going to say we should just print $1 trillion and be done with it. So this might just seem like small potatoes and like, hey, no big deal. Let's get on with it, right? I guess before I get started, first, a huge congratulations to the Carbon to Sea team. This is an amazing event. I just also want to acknowledge all the supporters here from the philanthropic side. This is not a cheap endeavor, and when I was in government last year, the services that the Carbon to Sea provided in terms of just technical support were always invaluable, but I think it's moments like this where they are carrying so much of the weight of this field as our government here is doing whatever they're doing at this moment. So I just wanted to say thank you, and thanks to the whole team for making this possible. This is really important. But part of the reason this is really important, and I guess I'll go straight in here to some nice scenario planning graphs, won't replace a novel, but if we really want to think big, we have to think about what carbon removal is going to look like over the next century. And I think what it boils down to in this lovely graph is we're going to need somewhere between a lot and an astounding amount of carbon removal over the next century. And doing so, getting to that place, will not be possible because we don't have the politics to simply go out and print the $1 trillion coin every year and just pay for this, right? We need to figure out how to make that possible, and that presents this paradox. How do we get technology that is niche, small scale, involves a lot of acronyms that people don't understand, and get it to the place where it can be really, really large scale? And part of that is it just needs to be cheap. Not the whole answer. We need to figure out lots of other pieces of it. But I think a necessary condition is if this stuff costs hundreds of dollars a ton, we're never going to get there. But at the same time, how are we going to get to a place where the solutions are at large scale and are low enough costs that we can figure out how to make the politics work? And when you look at this paradox, there actually are a number of really exciting paradigms out there that the world outside of climate and inside climate have used in the past to solve exactly this chicken and egg. And one of those actually comes from the public health arena, and it's what's known as an advanced market commitment. Basically, if you have a group of people that want something, but individually do not have enough demand, you have a group of people that want to sell something, but it's not worth building the thing unless there's sufficient demand. Getting everybody together into clubs and saying, collectively we commit to buying a whole bunch of this stuff in the future has this magic property of both solving the supply and the demand side of the equation. The suppliers all of a sudden see that there's, hey, this giant market out there. Maybe it is worth investing in large fixed costs to get things to scale. And the buyers are able to come together and make bigger, more efficient purchases, get economies of scale, really figure out how to move this forward. And so what I'm working on right now with a group of folks from industry and civil society is how do we do this for carbon removal with governments around the world? We heard from the Frontier team earlier. This is something that has happened in the private voluntary markets. But I think everybody recognizes that the voluntary markets have been incredibly catalytic for the carbon removal field to date, but are unlikely to scale to that hundreds of billions of dollars, let alone potentially trillions of dollars that we're going to need to carry this field alone. And so governments are going to have to play a role in here. And the theory here is if we can get those governments to come together, pool their resources, the whole can be greater than the sum of the parts, and that these folks can drive forward really pull forward innovation. And by sending out a signal to the market, do a lot of really important things that incidentally crowd in more and more voluntary carbon removal purchasing support as well. And so the idea is to go out, get governments to make big, ambitious pledges. Again, not trillions of dollars of the future demand. We don't need to solve this thing at once. But how can we get on the order of billions of dollars of new demand for carbon removal into the field in the next, say, 5 to 10 years? And that's our goal. We also think that there's a really important service that governments need to provide around the world, which is to say, what counts as carbon removal? What actually are the standards that we are going to use to say which things even count for this and how you need to prove that? And that's something that we've seen emerge in pockets around the world, but still haven't happened. Then there's the bureaucracy of it, which many folks in this room know well. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to go out and buy carbon removal credits if you're a government. So how can we work together to figure out a process for sharing that bureaucratic efficiency and moving forward? And we think that this can be something that really snowballs. If we can create an independent institution, governments make pledges that can crowd in a lot of private sector pledges. It can help the philanthropy field come in. And that can be a flywheel that starts spinning and gets us to the really big question. What I was going to do next is share a little bit more about some of the details of this AMC. But what I wanted to actually do was step back and use the few remaining minutes that I have here with more of a challenge to the audience and a question for you guys more than an answer, which is the entire premise of an AMC is based on the kind of theory of carbon markets, and that carbon removal will be developed in carbon credit business models. That whether it's a tax credit or a subsidy or an ETS integration, all are different variations on the same theme of we're advancing this field, we need to figure out MRV for a specific credit, and that's what's going to push this field forward. That's how it's worked in the voluntary market. We've seen voluntary CDR purchases already. There are folks delivering MCDR credits. And the question is, what does this field actually want to be when it grows up? Because it doesn't have to be something that is a carbon credit-driven framework in the same way that direct air capture, biomass carbon removal, some of these approaches that already have existing protocols, they're closed systems or more closed systems in many cases that actually lend themselves to that crediting framework in a little more direct and applicable way. I don't necessarily have an answer, but what I have to volunteer is that we don't have an alternative vision for how the MCDR field and the OAE field specifically are going to grow up, basically, and start to commercialize when that science is ready. And I think it's really important for us to, as a community, figure that out now. There are a few rooms that have thought about OAE more than this one here. And so I think it's just kind of assumed that, hey, MCDR is a type of CDR. We'll just figure out a protocol for it. We'll slot it into whatever existing CDR demand programs are out there, and we're off to the races. But again, that's not how this has to work. We could as easily conceive of a future where governments are paying organizations like the Army Corps of Engineers and the Coast Guard to do a lot of this work in a framework that's separate entirely from the carbon markets world. And that's not necessarily right, it's not wrong, but I think it's very helpful for this group to come to consensus on what do we actually want, because the design choices are being made now about what those demand frameworks are going to look like. And we don't have the luxury in this room that I think everyone here wants, which is a sequential approach of let's do research, let's figure out what makes sense, and then we'll start to scale it, because we're just not in that world. I think there's this perception that policy moves very slowly, and that's like technically true in aggregate, but policy actually in many cases doesn't move at all and then moves incredibly fast. And if we're not ready for those moments, which we simply cannot predict in this highly chaotic world, we're not going to be ready to meet that moment with the answer to the question of how do we actually scale MCDR and how does that really fit within frameworks like this, this advanced market commitment. And I honestly could see it going both ways. I could see an AMC like this being the type of financial tool that is specifically designed for OAE, where the nature of OAE and the upfront fixed costs, the international dimensions of the ocean are uniquely suited to this. Or it could be something where the crediting frameworks just don't make sense at all. We're never going to be able to compare an OAE project to a direct air capture project in ways that we can agree as a community make sense. And I think that question is not scientific in nature. It is subjective. We have to make a judgment call on that. And from my position in government for the past few years, we didn't have a lot of advice about how to make that subjective decision. We had an enormous amount of information on the technical readiness of a lot of these solutions, where we were, and we had the blessing of having like amazing people who actually could understand and digest all of that information and make good judgments. But the higher this gets up the food chain, the more the signal starts to fade, and this community needs to, in many ways, dumb down that message for the policymakers in a way that they can actually make a decision with the confidence that they need to. And so that's where I'd love to leave this, is I think we need to figure out how to get this field to scale. We need to start moving out of the R&D phase far before we are comfortable as a community to do that, and at least think about how the demand of this is going to come together, because the demand for carbon removal writ large is happening, and it's just assumed that MCDR is going to either piggyback on that or just be subsumed as part of that, unless we come together and make a really strong case for what else should happen. So with that, I want to say thanks. I have to run in just a minute, but maybe have time for one or two more questions. Happy to take those. I see one in the back. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Hi, everyone. I'm the founder of the Ocean Innovation Hub for Central America and the Caribbean. My mission is to create and articulate the MCDR ecosystem in my region. So it's hard. I am very concerned when I see the global map and I see a belt of empty in the funding for our regions. We are very aware on a community level of the impacts of climate change. It is recognized by community members as one of the main threats for their everyday activities, and they live it. But my question is, how, if any, what are the efforts being done to extrapolate this work in a multi-regional scale? Because we have the consciousness in the global south. There is the capacity and the resources in the global north. And I mean, we all have that political, challenge. As whatever happens here, we are replicating it down there. So whatever, we are seeing, we're in a mirror, basically. But I want to understand, if any, what is being done to, go farther. And I understand that I am very clearly understand the challenges at this moment. But how do we move this to being developed in other parts of the world, which are like ecologically, socially, economically connected?
It's a great question, and the answer is we're doing far too little. Right now, the majority of the conversations that I've been having about this AMC are with global north countries under the theory that the folks that have the most money and have contributed most of the problem can pay to clean this up. The urgency, however, that I'm seeing is lackluster at best. Everyone gets that we need to do this eventually. Everyone gets that we need to do this at small scale. The idea that you would do this at significant scale is challenging. I also see countries see this as a very self-interested thing. That, hey, we'll buy these carbon removal credits. It will create carbon removal industries domestically. That's a good thing, and it is. That's a great self-interested political story, right? But that means that the global south, which doesn't have the fiscal capacity to invest in this in the same way, is left behind unless we do something about that. And so I don't have a constructive answer for how to do that. I think there's a great role for philanthropy played here to build that capacity so the voices from the global south can advocate for the global north to do more to create that demand. And I think that's what's missing, is to have that type of urgency and to have those voices from the global south be clear and upfront that that's exactly what's needed. So I agree that that is an area where we could do a lot better and need to start prioritizing a lot more of our resources. But I see that I am unfortunately out of time. Thank you again to the whole team here, and look forward to continuing the conversation with you all.